Everybody, welcome to the show tonight. Mike Griffith here with Ingles on the Beat to talk about Georgia and Vanderbilt. So, want to get some Vanderbilt news out there. Had a chance to talk with Adam Sparks of the Tennessean. He covers Vanderbilt. Had a very good half-hour conversation with him earlier tonight. And Clark Lee, he says, is the lead candidate to replace Derek Mason as the Commodores head coach. There has been some talk about the service academy coaches, some talk about the sort of coach that could bring back the triple option that we saw at Georgia Tech. If it could work at Georgia Tech, could it work at Vanderbilt? Maybe that's a bit of an equalizer. But the Vanderbilt athletic director has indicated she is interested in a coach with some offensive skills. So that'll be very interesting. As for Derek Mason, his buyout estimated between $6 to $9 million. Florida may have some interest in bringing Derek Mason down as a defensive coordinator. That would be very interesting, Adam tells us. So just speculating, a lot of speculation out there. There's been a lot of talk by Candace Owens, the Vanderbilt athletic director, of doing some fundraising, improving the facilities. But as Adam told us earlier tonight, that's been talked about for years and years. It hasn't happened. Who's going to step up and donate all that money for Vanderbilt? Another interesting thing about the Vanderbilt firing of Derek Mason is that had the Vanderbilt game with Tennessee taken place, instead of the league changing it to be Missouri, Adam believes that Vanderbilt would have had a chance to beat Tennessee. Derek Mason 3-3 against Tennessee. And isn't it funny how those breaks work out? Instead, they go to Missouri. They don't have the same fervor for a road trip to Columbia, Missouri. Who does? And they get blanked 41-0. Now, there was some history made there. Sarah Fuller, the first female to kick for a Power 5 school. Very interesting story. Things got more interesting today when the SEC named her co-special teams player of the week. Adam said when Derek Mason chose Sarah to kick, she was a kicker off of the SEC championship soccer team. He did so because they really didn't have any other options. All their kickers were either gone or COVID-19 sidelined, and she was the best option. She'd made some short field goals in practice. They wanted her to execute that kick. So he did it with the intent of not having to worry about having a kicker. Adam felt like the award that the SEC gave out wasn't because of the merit of her kicking as Derek's decision was. So he said he didn't feel like that was really the intent that Derek Mason had. So there's obviously going to be some talk. I think controversy is too strong of a word, but some discussion over whether or not that merited or constituted SEC co-offensive player of the week. The other co-offensive player of the week was someone who had returned a punt for a touchdown. So a lot of talk there. By the way, Ben Cleveland, SEC offensive lineman of the week. You saw that Dog Nation gave him our game ball after that impressive, 334-yard rushing performance that the Bulldogs had against South Carolina the other night. Kirby Smart running the last 12 plays of the game. The first play of the fourth quarter was actually a touchdown pass to Arian Smith, and then Georgia got the ball back with 9.5 minutes left, and all they did was run the ball. So that is that. I want to talk a little bit about that on the front end. I brought that up on the post-game show Saturday night. Somebody said, well, why don't you ask him about it in the press conference? So I said, okay, I will. So I asked Kirby Smart today about coaching etiquette and not running up the score on opponents as opposed to taking a knee and running out the clock. I think Georgia fans felt like maybe that last 9.5 minutes, maybe JT Daniels could have been throwing the ball. Maybe he could have been working on future routes with Arian Smith or Darnell Washington, or getting George Pickens more than 4 targets, right? And more than 3 catches, or Jermaine Burton more than 3 catches, or getting Kyrus Jackson more than 2 throws. Here's what Kirby said. I asked him about coaching etiquette and not running up the score on opponents as opposed to taking a knee to run out the clock. And Kirby said, I don't know that's a fair assessment. I brought up the Alabama game and how they scored 60 on Kentucky. He said, I don't know that's a fair assessment. I didn't watch the Alabama game. I've been on the headphones with Coach Saban, and I have a lot of respect for him. There is many times that he has said, hey, that guy on the other sideline is a coach too, and he's worked for me, or I know him, and he has made a decision to take a knee. But what you're not going to do is tell your guys to not go out there and compete and get better. We were able to do that. We had a drive there that took however many minutes off the clock. Dejon Edwards got a lot of work, a lot of offensive linemen, 5 offensive linemen who had hardly gotten to play this year got to play. There were a couple wideouts that got to go out and play, and tight ends and freshmen. I look at it as we weren't going down the field not trying to score. We were trying to score. At some point, the game can be ended by a kneel, and you get an opportunity to do that. It doesn't matter if the ball was on the -1 or the +1. I do think there are times when you have to try to get your team better and get continuity. We did that. We threw the ball to Arian in a situation where we didn't have to. We have to continue to grow our team and get better. So it's just a matter of, Kirby looked at those last 12 runs as an opportunity to work on the run game and Dejon Edwards. I had wondered why you wouldn't throw the ball more than 16 times. As it turned out, the South Carolina quarterback was 18 for 22 for about 190 yards. JT Daniels was 10 for 16 for 139. You would never believe that the South Carolina quarterback could have a better passing line than the Georgia quarterback, but under the circumstances, that's just how it worked out. So looking at your questions here, I know there was some questions on here earlier about Dwan Mathis. So let me review and recap what happened with Dwan Mathis. So I had heard last Thursday, I got a call from Detroit. And you guys know that I worked in Michigan for a while. I grew up in Michigan. I went to Michigan State, covered Michigan State from, I guess it was maybe 2012 to 2016. So I know a lot of people that know a lot of people, and they know Dwan Mathis because Dwan's been on the radar in Michigan since he was in 6th grade. And somebody called me and said, hey, you might want to check on Dwan Mathis. I said, what's going on? And then I called Terrence and talked with the dad. He didn't say anything about a portal, and he didn't tell me that Dwan wasn't traveling. Obviously, they wouldn't want the other team to know that. That's team-sensitive information. I understand them not sharing that. I'm not looking to break any rules or get any competitive advantage stories. I just say what's going on. They told me it was a tough time. The next night before the game, I think it was Jake Rowe of 24/7 broke the story that Dwan was expected to go in the transfer portal. I asked Terrence on Twitter or text message, can you confirm it? He said, no, I cannot confirm it. I said, okay. So it was still fluid, still flexible. Today, Kirby Smart finally puts out the news. It is official that Dwan Mathis is in the transfer portal. And I'll read you the comments on Dwan Mathis. This whole show isn't going to be me reading Kirby Smart quotes, but there were a couple of pretty important ones. He said, as far as Dwan goes, he's handled everything first class. Every conversation he's had with me has been the right way. He did not want to be a distraction to the team. He was very hurt and disappointed that things came out before the game. That bothered him because he did not want to be a distraction to the team. He wanted it to come out today when he entered the portal. That's exactly what he asked, and that is what we did. I'm excited about his future. We want him to stay here. There's no doubt about that. We want him to stay here. We've encouraged him to stay here. But I also respect this as decision, and we're going to help him every way we can with transition. I think he's got a bright future. So, I look at Dwan Mathis as a great story for Georgia, a guy that Ron Corson literally saved his life, getting him to ER at Piedmont Athens Regional, where he had the emergency brain surgery to remove a cyst and fluid buildup on his brain. Dwan's comeback, he had lost 10 to 15 pounds in ICU. He was very weak. He pretty much had to learn to walk and run again, get his strength back. So much rehabilitation went into getting Dwan Mathis cleared. And 1 year later, the miracle happened. He became Dwan the Miracle Mathis when he got cleared to play football a year later. Unfortunately, there wasn't any spring drills, so he wasn't really able to run Todd Monken's new offense, new terminology. Remember, he really hadn't practiced much the year before. He'd been on the scout team in November, December, but he hadn't really worked with the Georgia offense that much. So I think if Dwan had spring, things could be different. But he didn't. And so he was behind. And when he had his opportunity against Arkansas, he wasn't at his best. He was still learning. And let's remember, Trey Hill was snapping the ball all over the yard. They didn't help him out. Jermaine Burton ran the wrong route, and it ended up being an interception in the red zone. There were a lot of things going wrong with the offense. And then Stetson came in and kind of calmed it down. So if you're Dwan, you go back to work as the second teamer because JT's working with the scout team, right? And then comes the Florida game. And Stetson, they're up 14-0. Stetson calls the wrong protection. He gets hit on the shoulders. He delivers a touchdown pass, sprains his AC joint. He's out. Dwan's back in for one series. I thought Dwan looked okay. I think they were just short of a first down. Then Stetson runs out of the tunnel. He's got a shot at cortisone. He tells Kirby he wants to play again. Kirby puts him back in, and he was awful. So it's the 10-minute mark of the third quarter. Stetson just thrown an interception. Dwan goes back in. They're down 41-21. That's his second chance. And he did lead him to a touchdown, but he also threw two interceptions and was inconsistent, which, what a ridiculously difficult situation to be put in, down by 3 touchdowns. But those were the 2 opportunities. And, I talked to Terrence and I said, man, this is a cruel game. We don't get to pick our times for opportunities. I think most of you watching know we don't get to pick our times for opportunities in life. And, Dwan's 2 opportunities were not ideal. Not to say that he was ready, not to say that if Trey Hill doesn't snap the ball all over the place, he does better. Who knows? But the bottom line was it wasn't an ideal situation. And then JT comes in and throws for 400, and Dwan's not no dummy. He looks at that and says, JT's the guy. JT's going to be the guy. JT's going to be the guy next year. And then beyond that, Kirby Smart likes Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett's probably going to be the 2. So I think that led to the decision. I had pitched to Terrence as a friend. I don't talk to anybody on the Georgia staff. I want to be clear about that. Nobody on the Georgia staff tells me anything. I wish they did, but Kirby's staff doesn't do that. He doesn't allow anybody to talk. He's a dictator type of coach. I'll talk about that a little bit later. He takes input from everyone, but he's very much one voice, right? That's Kirby's thing, one voice. He's the only one that's going to talk for his team. Because I said to Terrence, I said, look, man, with what Georgia's going to have next year with JT Daniels, I said, I just want you to think about this. You're going to have George Pickens. You're going to have Jermaine Burton. You're going to have Dominic Blaylock. You're going to have Darnell Washington. You probably will have James Cook. You're going to have Kenny McIntosh. You're going to have Kendall Milton. If Dwan lines up at receiver, he's 6'6". He's 215. He runs a 10-800. He's got a 40-inch vertical jump. Who's covering that guy one-on-one? I said, Terrence, he comes back to Georgia and plays receiver. He could be being talked about as a 2nd or 3rd round draft pick at this time next year, with just 1 year, because he's a quarterback, because he understands leverage, because he understands coverages. Think how much more knowledge and how far ahead Dwan Mathis would be as a receiver. And he played some receiver in high school. You do that for a year, and then you got the option, right? You're still working out. You're still throwing the ball. These guys work out all the time together. You're still throwing routes to the other guys. But you do that for a season, and then you sit there and you say, what do I want? Do I want to go pro as a receiver, or do I want to stay at Georgia and compete at quarterback again? Because you can jump right back into it, right? Or do you want to transfer? See, the thing about Dwan that's amazing is he still has 4 years of eligibility left. So to me, it was like, do that for a year. Go all in on that. Georgia could have a national championship team next year. Their offense is going to be the best in the SEC. He said, man, me and Dwan are talking about a lot of things. So he's in the portal now, which means now he's talking to a lot of things with a lot of teams above board. I think Michigan State, Ohio State are 2 of the schools I've been told are interested in him. Michigan, obviously, don't know to what degree, but they're all going to tell him what he wants to hear, folks. They're all going to tell Dwan that he can come there, play quarterback, and compete to start right away. But the reality is, and I told Terrence this too, any quarterback room you go into, there's going to be 2 or 3 guys, and there's going to be politics. It's just the way it is. I've done this. I've covered college football, for 28 years. And it's the same story, different colors, different names, different people everywhere. But it's the same story every time. Dwan's not going to walk into a winning Power 5 program and have somebody give him the keys to the offense. It happened for Justin Fields, but that's a very unique situation. So He's going to have to weigh his options and decide what he really wants. I know Georgia's moved on. I know Georgia fans have, in the sense of, hey, Brock Vandergrift's coming in next year. Carson Beck is back. Obviously, JT Daniels. Stetson Bennett is back. So you've already got a full quarterback room. I would slow the roll on Brock Vandergrift. He hasn't played real competition. He's played at small private level schools in Georgia, as opposed to Carson Beck, who won a state title at the largest classification level in Florida, or JT Daniels, that played at the largest classification level in California and won a state title there, as well as a national championship. So, don't ask too much of Brock Vandergrift. When he's running past these 150-pound kids, that's great. Okay. But that's high school, and the SEC is nothing like that. People aren't going to break on his ball the same way. So I see these expectations, and I just tell people, slow your roll. This is a pro style offense. I think Vandergrift has got it. I think he's intellectual. I think he'll pick it up quickly, but picking it up and asserting yourself in that offense at the speed of the game can take time. It could happen. Trevor Lawrence did it at Clemson about 4 games in. Do we think that Brock Vandergrift is Trevor Lawrence? I don't. You may think so. I don't see that yet. I'm not going to say it can't happen, but right now I think those are high expectations. I think JT Daniels is the guy. I think Carson Beck will push Stetson Bennett for the number 2 job. And I think Vandergrift is a guy that works his way in. And his second year on campus, I think he's competing for the job. That's a realistic expectation, is that year 2, he competes for the job. Let's take a look at some of your questions. Robert Reynolds says, I think when you're up 30 points and handing the ball off, put in the backup quarterback. I not the backup quarterback. See, you keep the starter in. Here's why. The air raid offense, and that's what you're seeing Todd Monken run as principles of the air raid offense, is based on timing, okay? One of the unique elements of the air raid is that players don't run designated patterns they run to space, and you need your quarterback to be on the same wavelength as your receiver. The most amazing part of JT Daniels' performance against Mississippi State wasn't the numbers. It was that he was able to complete that many passes without an interception when he'd only worked with those guys for 2.5 weeks. Now, he'd worked with them in the fall with a big, heavy knee brace on before he was 100%. He couldn't get that torque on his throws with the plant leg and the knee brace. That was something his father, Steve, had told me way back when. I knew that way back when. But I'm not a team doctor, and it's not my place to speak. And Steve said it again in the recent story. When I talked to Steve about it, he's like, Mike, it's just like I told you back in August when I went to the scrimmage. We had questions about JT's ability to throw off of that right leg. And look, I'm not there. I live in California. We chose Georgia because we trust Kirby and Ron Corson. So, you're asking me these questions, and all I can do is tell you what JT's telling me. And JT's telling me he's doing his best, and he'll play when Kirby says he's ready. I mean, that's just what it is, and it's as simple as that. And Kirby's talking with Ron Corson constantly, and Kirby's seeing JT on the scout team every day. So the head coach is monitoring this, and so many people have turned it into so many different things. I'm just giving you the story in real time. Here's what was really said at the time. I've been on the story all year long. And this is just what came out. So now that JT is playing, though, he needs that work, right? And I think if there was a message I could give to Kirby Smart, and listen, Kirby's not the head coach at Georgia because he listens to sports writers, okay? He could listen to some people a little bit more often, though, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But the thing I would tell Kirby Smart, the error that he made in my book, is you got to take care of your receivers. Kirby is a defensive coach, but you got to understand how your receivers' minds work. It's really hard for George Pickens to only get 4 targets when he could be anywhere else getting 10. Let's be honest. George Pickens is a special player. If he was at Alabama, if he was at Florida, if he was at LSU, if he was at Auburn, if he was at Clemson, George would be getting 7 to 10 targets every game. Take care of George Pickens. Or I'm worried George is going to squirt Kirby with a water bottle, because George needs the ball. I mean, this is what he's like an addict. He's got to have the ball, man. Great receivers need the ball. Feed the monster. And you gave your fifth string tailback 14 carries. Your top three receivers combined had 12 targets. I would bet you that Kirby was not aware that they only threw the ball 16 times. I bet you when somebody handed him that play sheet, when I was watching the review of the press conference, he looked, he brought up more than once why he was running. I guarantee he looked at that play sheet and said, dang, we only threw it 16 times. Golly, it sure did seem like more than that. Because Georgia had 225 yards of offense and 21 points in the first quarter. They were on pace for 900 yards of offense and 84 points at South Carolina after one quarter. And they put the brakes on it. And I read you that quote earlier about Kirby saying, Nick Saban knows this guy and all that. I think that's Kirby saying, yeah, Mike Bobo is a friend of mine. Mike Bobo is a Georgia guy. But that's tough. That's tough because it's etiquette. But on the other hand, we're in an age now where when you're paying a coach $6 million, his friendships have to be secondary to that paycheck. You're getting paid $6 million a year to make Georgia a dynasty. You're getting paid $6 million a year to win the SEC East every year. You're getting paid like that. You're getting paid like a guy that's in the college football playoff every year. So when you're not, style points matter. Georgia fans want to see 60 points against South Carolina. They want to see 72 on a depleted Vanderbilt because that's what great teams do. Alabama put 60 on Kentucky, okay? Clemson puts up big numbers. Somebody said to me this morning, I think I was doing the ref show in Athens, and Logan Booker is a buddy of mine. He goes, but Mike, you had that great passing game last week against Mississippi State. This is a great running game. I said, whoa, wait a minute. 28 for 38 is not great anymore. 28 for 38 for 401 yards is just another day at the office for Kyle Trask and Mac Jones. That's just another day at the office at Clemson. 28 for 38 for 401 yards against a 2-5 team is what you should do if you're Georgia. That's not a great day. That's not amazing in this year. Everybody's throwing for a lot of yards. Florida fans, look at Trask's number compared to Joe Burrow. This year's a lot different than last year. When you look at the numbers of what teams are doing, the defenses are not as prepared. And also Joe Burrow beat like 7 top 10 or top 25 teams. Kyle Trask is 1-1 against the top 25 right now. He lost to A&M and he beat Georgia. And we'll see what Kyle does against. He's got Tennessee this week. And I guess Tennessee's got a couple defensive guys out for COVID. So the Gators keep getting them breaks. And then he's got a bad LSU team. And then he'll play against Alabama. So, Gators didn't play Auburn this year. They didn't play Alabama this year. Sometimes you get the breaks, man. Sometimes you get the breaks and it's going good. Kyle Trask is a Heisman candidate. I think Kyle Pitts is starting to emerge as a guy we have to look at. I think Mac Jones, after his 5-touchdown performance against Auburn, to me, is still a guy that's in the race. Najee Harris is having a great season as well. I think you got to see how Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence close at Ohio State and Clemson. I'm just not ready to hand the Heisman to anybody. So that's why I'm just so amazed that it was just that Paul Feinbaum was just astonished that I only said that, Kyle Trask is in my top 4 or 5. And then, Greg McElroy says, oh, well, how can that be? How can that be? Guys, we still got games left this season. I don't have that list ranked yet. It's going to take time for me to let that, I got to see how it goes. I'm not going to, hand anybody the Heisman mid-season whether they want a participation trophy. But this is where we're at, right? We're in this now society. We want it all now, So Florida fans want Kyle Trask to get the Heisman now. Georgia fans want JT Daniels to throw for 500 yards now. Again, the only thing I would say is you got to take care of George. You got to get George the ball. You got to get him the ball. And it's hard to say, I gave a fifth-string tailback 15 carries, and I only gave George Pickens 4 throws. Right? Can you play those young linemen and still play your receivers? Sure you can. So, listen, Kirby's not perfect. Let me get to my Kirby Smart spiel. So Kirby's got to make a million decisions like any other head coach. And I think he makes most all of them right, actually. And I think he's only wrong on occasion, not very often at all. But does he have that guy on his staff does he have that guy on his staff that he knows will tell him, not what he wants to hear, but what he needs to hear? So when I think back to Michigan State and Mark D'Antonio, and I compare him to Kirby because Mark was a Nick Saban assistant coach at Michigan State who coached DBs for Nick. And Mark played cornerback at South Carolina. So he's very similar to Kirby in those respects. And Mark had Pat Narduzzi, who's now the Pitt head coach. And Narduzzi would tell Coach D'Antonio, listen, man, I ain't on board. You need to know this is what guys are saying. And then I think of Gene Stallings. And I think Kirby's a lot like Gene Stallings too, because Gene was a DB. And just as Kirby coached under Saban and had some time with Mark Richt and Bobby Bowden, Gene Stallings coached under Paul Bear Bryant and the great Tom Landry with the Dallas Cowboys. And Gene had a guy like that in Woody McCorvey. And you may not know who Woody is, but Woody is Dabo Swinney's right-hand man. And Woody was responsible for helping Dabo build the infrastructure of this Clemson dynasty. So who is that guy for Kirby? Who is that guy on his staff that he really respects and that he listens to? We're going to talk more about that right after this break. I want to take a moment and I want to thank my sponsor, Ingalls, for everything they do to bring us this program every week. If it wasn't for Ingalls, we wouldn't be here. And if it wasn't for Ingalls, we wouldn't have gotten through that pandemic. And we're still getting through it, and Ingalls is still there for us. So take a moment with me as we pay our respect to our sponsor, Ingalls.
It's in our hearts to feel for you. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad. But we stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back with open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand. Community strong.
Well, hey, welcome back, everybody. Mike Griffith here, and we were just talking about Kirby Smart, and who is that guy on his staff that can pull Kobe? Hey, coach, I need to tell you something, okay? Mike Griffith says, here's what you do. No, that's not what they're going to say. They're going to say, coach, maybe we should have thrown the ball to George Pickens on that last series. Why don't you go over there and put your arm around George and tell him next game you got him? Because, he blocked the whole game and he only got 4 throws, and he's probably upset. I mean, true. And Kirby probably did that. I'm telling you, Kirby looked at that stat sheet, and I'll bet you he couldn't believe they only threw 16 passes. But it was the flow of the game. Kirby's not a guy that worries about stats. He's just not. And there's a lot of good to be said for that. But I think we're in an era now when you're trying to recruit receivers and make everybody happy. I think you got to kind of take care of everybody. You got to touch all the bases. As we used to say, as they used to say at Alabama, you got to give them some sugar, man. And but who is that guy? So I look at the defensive staff, and I look at Dan Lanning and Glenn Schumann. And I think Kirby likes these guys and respects these guys. And I think he sees a little bit of himself in both of these young up-and-coming coaches. Glenn and Dan are both going to be head coaches and have their own programs one day. They're brilliant tacticians. They're wonderful coaches. Their players love them. They recruit incredibly well. So I think Dan and Glenn are two guys that Kirby listens to. On the offensive side of things, I think Todd Monken is a guy that Kirby really is really come to enjoy, because he went from being Coach Monken to Todd. When Kirby calls a coach by his first name, I think that's a good sign, right? And I think Todd Monken has impressed Kirby. I think he's winning his trust. But the guy that I think can have the heart-to-heart with Kirby and argue with him and say you're wrong is Matt Luke. I think Matt Luke is the glue guy. A lot of times great defensive coaches don't always get along with offensive gurus. It's really just an oil and water mix. I've seen this at a few different places. And so you kind of wonder about Monken and Kirby just inherently, not cat dog kind of thing, but when in Matt Luke, you've got a guy that played in the SEC at the same time Kirby did, that's also been an SEC head coach. And these are guys that, they hung out at baseball games last year, Georgia baseball games. They're seen together a couple times, and I think there's just a genuine yin and yang, right? I mean, Matt's an offensive mind, Kirby's a defensive mind, but I think they speak a lot of the same language. And I think Matt can be there. I think Mike Cavan, I think everybody knows Mike. He's a senior advisor over there. I don't know his official title, but Mike's been around forever. Of course, everybody knows he's the guy that brought Herschel Walker to Georgia. Extremely well-connected figure. It's funny, when I was doing that interview with JT Daniels' parents, back when, whatever it was, the last time we were doing the story on how was his health, they were saying, when we came to Georgia, we had such a great time. And there was a guy that played quarterback for them that actually won the SEC Player of the Year over Archie Manning. And I said, well, who would that have been? I said, it wouldn't have been Ray Goff. Ray was SEC Player of the Year in '76. Archie predated Ray. And I look it up. And I go, Mike Cavan. And they go, yeah, that's his name. Yeah, he just happened to be there. I said, he didn't just happen to be there. He said, what do you mean? I said, he was there to scope you out. I said, Kirby, they always say Kirby's got eyes. Mike was there to get a feel for that family, right? Mike is a great recruiter and a tremendous judge of character. Oh, sorry about that. Kicked the camera. So I said, yeah, you just met one of Kirby's right-hand men and you didn't even know it. I mean, Mike Cavan is tremendously respected at Georgia. He carries so much power and authority and weight. If you want to get a message to Kirby, you talk to Mike Cavan. So that there is a setup, and that's why, like right now, a part of me, kind of sees Kirby growing from all this. The Kirby that I saw today at the press conference was very different. Was very, very different than the Kirby that I saw after the game, and very different than the one that was in the press conference last week. He was relaxed. I felt a degree of humility. He was balanced. I think Kirby's done a lot of thinking. And understand this. Kirby's not a touchy-feely guy, okay? Kirby's not a guy that's going to spend any time saying, I'm wrong, we did this wrong, I look back on it and feel bad. Kirby is not that guy, and he doesn't need to be that guy. Here's why. Incredibly successful people like Kirby Smart don't waste any time on yesterday's failure. They learn from it, but they don't dwell on it. You move on. Kirby was a defensive back at Georgia. He has the gunfighter mentality. I know that gunfighter is probably not a politically correct term, but go with me on it. DBs have to line up in single coverage all the time and cover a guy, and they have to be fearless. And on occasion, they're going to get beat. You've heard Kirby say that before. It's going to happen. If you play cornerback, safety, you're going to get beat eventually. And the thing that all the great coaches I've covered say is you got to have a short memory. You get beat on a play, forget about it, flush it, right? And wall it up in a piece of paper in your mind and throw it away. Move on to the next play. You got to have a short memory. Kirby Smart's got a short memory. He learns from things. He catalogs them. He compartmentalizes them, but he doesn't waste time on it, all right? He does what he thinks is best at the time. He's not going to go back and apologize for a decision that he thought was best at the time, and he shouldn't. Mark D'Antonio didn't. Gene Stallings didn't. I could give you scores of examples, but you'd be bored. So this is part of what makes Kirby great. It makes him seem defiant. It makes him seem defensive, but he's not those things. It's just a guy who has tremendous confidence, who does all his homework, who does all his research, and bases decisions off of all that work, off that input from the other coaches. And so he can apologize. Now, if he just made some haphazard decision and it was wrong, fine, apologize. But that ain't how this cat operates, okay? So David Pollack did a great job explaining the mentality of greatness on a podcast. David Pollack was absolutely an all-time great. That's why he's going in the College Football Hall of Fame. That's why he's the most decorated defensive player in Georgia history. Unbelievable success story to this day. You may not like some of David's opinions. I personally enjoy watching David, even though I don't agree with his opinions. I like a guy that's transparent and tells me what he really thinks. And David Pollack will definitely do that. But he was talking to Dari Noka, a guy that I think does a tremendous job on ESPN and SEC Network. I actually hope to have Dari on one of these shows. And Dari was saying, yeah, JT Daniels, he's an arrogant guy. And Pollack goes, no, he's not arrogant. He's not arrogant. Let me explain something to you. That's not arrogance. That's confidence. And there's a difference. And Pollock was talking about how players and people with a great mentality never really accept that they were beaten, in the sense of this. Pollock was saying, when I played in the NFL and I would get matched up against, Willie Roaf, and he cited another tackle, Jonathan Ogden, and I couldn't beat him, right? They would block me. Pollock would say, I didn't say, oh man, I just got beat by that guy. Pollock would say, oh man, I did something wrong with my hands. There was something I could have done different in that situation, right? And when he said that, it kind of clicked when Kirby was talking about Stetson Bennett. He wasn't going, oh man, we had the wrong guy. He said, no, we should have called this play. We should have executed this better. The players around him can make this work. That sounded like defiance, but in reality, it was just Kirby explaining his mindset of why he believed that play could work. And this is what you got with Kirby, though. And it's not going to change. This is who he is. He's very thorough. He wants to win worse than anybody. But he's not going to spend any time crying over spilt milk. Now, can he evolve? Can he change? Can he roll with the times? Can he become that guy that scores 60 points like Saban does at Alabama? Can he become that guy like Dabo Swinney and have a quarterback throw for 400 and only maybe have 20 carries and have 40 passes? Yeah, if they win. Yeah, if they're efficient, right? If that's part of a winning formula, he's down with that. But you better convince him that you can win that way. And you better earn his trust that you're not going to turn it over. And you better earn his trust that you're going to make the right decision. But, and JT Daniels, just like any other quarterback, it's going to take time to earn Kirby's trust. Can it happen this year? Maybe. Do I think that Kirby will take care of George and Kieris and Jermaine Burton and get him those targets? Yes, I do. Do I think he's probably thought twice about that? Yes, I do. Do I think he would ever admit that? No, I don't. And I see William Morgan saying, when you spill milk, you got to clean it up. Well, he's doing that. That's behind the scenes. He's got, he's not going to come out in a press conference and say, okay, guys, here's, what I'm saying. I think you can trust Kirby Smart to manage the Georgia football program. I really do. I think you're in great hands. I think Georgia goes into next season, as I said earlier in this interview, I think they go into next season as a national championship contender. I think the offense will be the best offense in the SEC. I think it's up to Kirby to find a place to let Todd Monken let this thing go, air this thing out, and turn JT Daniels free. And I think you'll see that. I really do. I think you're going to see great chemistry between JT and those receivers. I think JT's coming back. I'm not saying it's a done deal because I don't know that. It's just the vibe I get is JT loves Georgia. I mean, he really loves Georgia. It's not just I love Georgia because that's where I'm at. Like, JT digs it here in Athens, Georgia. I've told you guys it's a great place. I don't know why you want to go play games anywhere else, but he loves Georgia. So you got that going for you. And he loves throwing to George Pickens. Pickens is the bomb. George Pickens, did you see that 17-yard catch George made? I mean, he attacked that ball like a golden eagle knocking a hawk out of the sky. I mean, it was just like, man, George Pickens. I mean, I've seen two plays in the last 3 weeks that have just blown my mind. George on that 17-yard catch, the way he just attacked and annihilated that ball in midair with a DB. I mean, he was going to do whatever he had to do. And then that Lewis Cine hit on Pitts was just, I mean, I haven't seen a hit like that in a long, long time. Lewis Cine is fast becoming the defensive leader, and I like that. Lewis is so businesslike. Lewis is just a tough guy. He may not be as playful as some other people you've seen as leaders, but he's just all business, man. And I think Lewis Cine is rapidly becoming a Georgia legend before our eyes. He hasn't reached icon status yet, but I think he is becoming a Georgia. I think he's going to be a preseason like all SEC guy. He could rise to All-American if he gets the interception numbers, but the way he plays, the way he covers ground, the way Lewis comes up and runs support, I'm going to tell you, I'm a fan of his game. I'm a fan of Kyle Pitts' game at Florida, right? I'm a fan of Najee Harris's game. People, as a sports writers, what team do you root for? You don't. You root for greatness. You see things out there and you go, man, that guy's going to be great. Like, I like watching Kendall Milton touch the ball and Kenny McIntosh because every time they get it, Kenny had what I thought was one of the best runs of the year, that 32-yard run. His vision, he showed next level vision on that run with the cuts that he made. Not only to see the run and anticipate, but then to have the footwork and change direction like Kenny McIntosh does. That's next level stuff. Milton has next level power. They got some special guys. What can I say? They've got some really special guys on offense. Defense, who's coming back? I've had some people ask me that because this year doesn't count, right? So I look at the defense and I go, well, let's go on the front line. So Malik Herring's already accepted his Senior Bowl invite. That's a pretty good indication that he's gone. Julian Rochester had a knee injury. That would tell me he's probably back. He would be a sixth-year senior. Jordan Davis, I would say, is probably gone. The nose tackle, he's a junior. Azeez Ojulari, I would say, is probably leaning towards going because he'd be in the first 2 or 3 rounds. But you never know. He might come back. He might want to be in the first 15 picks. At Alabama, that's what they do. They come back if they're in the first round. If they're anything lower than the first round, the Alabama guys don't go. I think Kirby's trying to get his Georgia guys to have that elite mentality that, hey, I don't need to leave college until I'm a first rounder. I will be a first rounder if I finish up. Monty Rice, tough call. Monty's had a foot injury. Do I think he's gone? Not sure. Has not accepted a Senior Bowl invite yet. Richard LeCount's another one I'm not sure on, right? I know Richie was planning on going. I don't know how banged up he is. I don't know what his workouts would look like right now if he went. So there's some question there. Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes, I think both of those guys are probably gone. And I think they're probably both go first 2 rounds picks. So it'd be really interesting to see who comes back now. Taking a look here, Chad Buchanan, Milton is the running back, McIntosh behind him. I think it's kind of a complimentary piece. I think James Cook, Georgia's going to have a lot of great offensive players next year. It's very exciting when you think about the Georgia football future. So I'm looking forward to that. I know that you guys are looking forward to that. It's going to be an incredible season for Georgia next year, I believe. I know that, people, look, there's Georgia talking about next year. Well, there is Georgia talking about it next year because they are a perennial national championship contender. Some programs aren't talking about. You think Michigan State's talking about next year with Mel Tucker? They're not. You think Michigan's talking about next year? They're not. There's not a lot of programs that can talk about next year. They just hold their breath and hope for 8 or 9 wins and they'll be pleased with it, right? But the standard is such at Georgia that we've sat here tonight and complained about a 45. I say we because I see your comments about a 45-16 win. That's how great Georgia football has become. We're talking about not only winning by 45-16, we're talking about getting certain receivers the ball 8 and 10 times. That's how great Georgia football has become. Don't get it wrong. Don't misunderstand the message. Having critical analysis for a coach like Kirby Smart is kind of like having critical analysis for a guy like Bill Belichick, okay? He's one of the great coaches in the profession. And yet and still, you say, now how can you make it a little bit better, right? And that we all say, Kirby, how can we have our cake and eat it too? Don't just beat them 45-16, beat them 63-16. And on top of it, make sure that all your receivers, Kirby's probably going, guys, what the heck? You think this is Burger King? You don't have it your way. I'm calling a game. I'm just trying to win. But as you get better and get near the top, the stakes go up. And there's less margin for error when you're trying to win the national championship. There's only one, right? There's only one SEC champion. So I think that's a lot of it. I'm going to close it down. This has been a great show. I want to thank you for joining me on Ingles on the Beat. Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, don't forget, Brandon Adams, Dog Nation Daily. Tomorrow night, it's Connor Riley, Connor in coverage. Wednesday night, Jeff Centel, Before the Hedges recruiting show. Thursday night, our cover 4, We Fight Like Brothers. You guys know, can get a little out of hand. It can get a little out of hand. And then Friday night, Mike. And then Saturday, I'll be back for the halftime show at the Vanderbilt game. So let's keep our eyes peeled for news this week. Let's see what happens with Vanderbilt. They've got an interim coach. Let's see if Sarah Fuller, the female kicker, first ever Power 5 kicker, will she kick in Sanford Stadium next Saturday night for senior night? Let's see who walks. Let's see who doesn't. Let's see who says they played their last game. And let's see what the scoreboard says at the end. Everybody have a safe and wonderful week. Thanks for joining me tonight.